this week I have a lot of refinement to do. It might not seem like I'm making massive changes to the painting, but these are really important elements and details that I want to include in the work. Plus, I have a bit of a deadline from my gallery to get some press images out and information. So I know that first off, I wanted to enlarge some of the figures. They weren't quite the right size, so that's kind of what I'm doing in the beginning here, blocking in a little bit larger scale of the figures. And then I also have my nice journal where I am keeping track of, oops, you know, what I need to get done which days. So I have until May 31st, basically next week, to try and complete this painting. Let's see if I can get it done. Figures today, pattern the next few days, and then kind of the plant work the next 3 days after that, and then back to the figures. And I'm hoping that it'll feel as complete as I want it to be, and I can call it done.
To best show you this tedious stage of painting, I took these two detail photos so that you can see how I'm refining elements of the piece and cleaning things up. Can you tell the difference? Hey, so I've decided that I think it's pretty well finished now. It took quite a bit of fiddling over the past 2 weeks. It took a little bit longer than I might have imagined, and I don't know, at that stage when I'm just looking at details and really contemplating on what makes a painting finished, I feel a little bit self-conscious, I admit. So it also was something that I suppose is not very exciting for video footage, but I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. So looking a little bit closer, I did take the painting out of the studio space just because it just really felt cramped in there, and I wanted to have better lighting. You know, taking a good photograph of your work is super important, so I often will actually photograph mine in natural light outdoors. It works best if you can find an area where there's a good bit of shade, or a little bit of shade anyway, or even choose an overcast day to make sure that you get nice color and detail with the work. And here is a full view of the completed piece.
Hey, so I finally got the studio cleaned up and I finished. Hooray, I'm really happy about that. But I did want to kind of return to this conversation about, you know, how long did it take you to make that, or how long did it take you to do that, which is a question that artists pretty much always get. And honestly, I have to admit, it is quite frustrating. A couple videos ago, I did try to start to map out some of the amount of time that I take to produce the work. But I think, you know, whether an artist spends maybe a longer or shorter time, it doesn't really matter so much as the breadth of their experience. And, you know, you can think about the fact that, you know, there's all this time taken in like prepping a surface, you know, preparing your colors, thinking about what you're doing, researching your imagery, not to mention all the time you spent, you know, educating yourself as an artist, whether or not that's formal education or informal education, it still matters. So an artist could say, you know, every single work that they do takes, you know, the entire amount of time that they've been considering themselves an artist to make. So for me, I don't know, 20 plus years, you know, 30 years, I could say. So that's something to keep in mind. And like, I think the more important thing is that it's not just like, oh, how many hours did I spend holding my hand in the air, you know, just to create this mark, but more about, you know, what is the work about? And I mean, this is the thing that often gets criticized in terms of contemporary art, you know, that, you know, because people, they want often, you know, kind of like a surface response, and part of the surface response is like how many hours it took to make a mark, to create a color, to do all the things that you're doing to produce an image. But behind that is all of the thought process that goes into, you know, why you chose to make that work in the way that you made it. And so that's something I really appreciate, talking to people who are interested in my work about.
So since I've been talking about weeds, I thought I might give you a little bit of context of what I've been trying to get rid of in my yard. Look at all of this stuff. I've been delaying because I've been trying to finish the painting. But yeah, next couple days, these guys are gonna get pulled. Definitely. So, as you spent time on your own out in the yard outside, pandemic should be coming to an end soon, I hope. But these are just things I've been thinking about as I have been working on ideas for my new body of work that I'm producing.
So I have a show coming up. I'm hoping that this work will be in that show or some other exhibition soon. And so my gallery has asked me to kind of give a little bit of blurb about what the work is about, and I thought you might be interested in knowing as well. So the title of this piece actually is called Fair Game, created just now, oil and linen, 6 feet square. But as far as like my larger conceptual ideas with my work, I'm starting to really form them a little bit more carefully or clearly now. It takes me a good bit of time to just sort of let things simmer in the back of my head before I can really fully articulate them as, text that I have to then, present to a public in an artist talk or something like that, which isn't always easy. It's probably one of the hardest things that artists do. I myself, am somewhat of an introvert, so I find that, it's a little bit more nerve-wracking to stand in front of a crowd and have to, talk with concise detail about my work and the ideas behind it, because for artists and particularly for me, those come from, I suppose, a very internal or personal place that we're then pulling out and putting out into the world. So there's a way that you have to kind of really think about carefully talking about your work, which is something that when I'm teaching, I talk to students and help them through quite carefully as well as I can. The full body of my work, all of the work I'm producing, really stems to this idea of struggle and ruin, personal versus public, and really, considering what we as individuals struggle with versus what we struggle with on a larger, more societal level. So with these pieces, these weeds and this overgrowth that you see in my work, it really serves as a metaphor. And that's a metaphor for personal or even public habits or things in our lives that we want to get rid of. During the pandemic, we all spent a good bit of time alone, right? Sorting through things, figuring out what our own habits are. And it's all become very clear to us because we had no choice but to look at our own selves. So I ended up spending a good amount of time out in my yard reading, and I was thinking about this idea of weeds as something that we decide we don't want or we want to get rid of, and we pull them out and we take them away as much as we can, and we do our best, but over time they return, they keep coming back, and I see them something like these bad habits or bad behaviors that maybe we want to rid ourselves of in our lives, and it becomes something like a cycle, repetition, which is similar to some of the patterns that you see me depicting in the work. And then also, thinking about, in relation to this, our own selves as human beings and our own identity, our sexuality, our sort of animalistic nature. And that is where I started to play around with the narrative of the figures that are coming across over the top of these weeds and this overgrowth. Just thinking about, how I can create a play on this sort of animal nature, on gendered identity, sexuality, and even fantasy, and get the viewer to really think about, their own selves and their lives and how these things play out. So I hope that you enjoy the work, and I'm pretty excited to finally finish this one, and this should give me a clearer view on how best to proceed with the other pieces that I have going on in my other studio that I'm going to be continuing with.